So hit that okay. So we don't want anyone else recording these. These will live on the back end for the 1776 syndicate members for all posterity. Please keep your computers on mute. I'll unmute when we get to the question answer phase. And that'll keep any background noise down to a minimum. And remember, I know we haven't had a problem yet. Jim and I were being proactive when we set up the rules for the syndicate. And that was, we wanted to make sure everything was civil. And if anyone was getting inappropriate, belligerent, anything like that, we reserve the right to shut you down, shut you off. And yes, we'll call it censorship if you want, but this is a private network and we intend to keep it professional and civil. So it gives me great pleasure tonight to introduce our guest, Dr. Dave Ingram. Dr. Ingram is going to bring to us a message of the emergence of wokeism as a religion. I hope I haven't diverged too much from your original content there, Doctor. But I know with your background, and you've alluded to it several different times in different meetings, you bring a really interesting perspective to what we see currently as wokeism or this new wave, but you've been living through this for, well, your entire adult life. So we're anxious to hear that part of it. So just as a brief intro, and I'll let you get into more of your intro, I please hope that you will, Doctor, but having practiced medicine for over 30 years, people have entrusted their very lives to you. I'm sure that as many times as I've been under the knife, you've probably put me under. I just don't remember. So we could go back and compare notes, but chances are probably good that you or at least one of your colleagues put me out and brought me back. So that's a good thing. You're also a small business owner. You currently sit on the library board, which is doing its own challenge with wokeism. We know that. And you are currently running for House District 7 for the legislature in Montana, and we wish you the best of success with that. We know that absentee ballots have just gone out. I'm getting that crazy echo. So, Doc, I'm going to mute myself. And I'm going to turn it over to you.
Good evening. Like Rod said, my name's Dave Ingram. I'm an anesthesiologist, currently retired from OR practice, doing administrative work in my small business. Just a little bit of background for myself. I think I bring a kind of an interesting mix of experiences to the table as I try to interpret things as they're going on. I grew up in New Jersey, born in Paterson, and went to a mid-state high school. Unfortunately, we did not escape the civil strife of the 60s and 70s, riots in my high school, and it was multicultural, multiracial. This gave me a little bit of a background on some strangeness that has crept into society, from fifth graders being good friends with each other to no longer being able to interact in any meaningful fashion by the time we reached high school. After high school, I went to college and medical school in a very liberal university, not as liberal as it is now, Columbia University, famous now for its separate graduations for different genders and sexes and ethnicities, which is a sad thing. And also matriculating to med school at the same university in the late 70s during the times of Abe Beam and Ed Koch as mayor, and Bella Abzug, if you recognize any of those names, as our city councilwoman. It was a dark time for New York before Giuliani. A lot of crime, violence, and I personally experienced a lot of that between being robbed 5 times and having a friend on my med school rugby team killed as he went to take his shift at the emergency room, which was quite shocking, unfortunately. But I did experience the blackout of New York City in 1960 or 76, 77, which really showed me how quickly the thin veneer of civilization could be peeled away with just a rolling blackout. This was not an apocalypse now type of a situation. It was they knew the power was going to come back on. It was just a lightning strike up the Hudson River on a power plant. But those things made a big impression on me, along with the AIDS epidemic. And those things were all mixed together. We didn't know what that was back then. We called it GRID, gay-related immunodeficiency. And obviously we had a very large gay and lesbian population in the city, along with drug addicts. After leaving New York City, 8 years, went to Charlottesville, Virginia to finish my training, which was kind of a quiet respite for several years while I finished up, and then headed west. I spent a couple of years in Albuquerque, which is a kind of a tricultural community with Anglos, Hispanic, and Native Americans in the mix, mostly Navajo tribe, before getting the call in the doctor's lounge in Albuquerque to say there was an opening here, and just took a flyer at it, and we've been here since for 31 years now, enjoying God's country, if you will, and came to Montana to let it change me, not change it. But my experiences in the other areas of the country have also given me an opportunity to realize the commonalities in humanity that we have all through the country, and that people are people. And interestingly, my undergraduate degree was in cultural anthropology, so I felt an attunement to paying attention to the way different peoples approach the problems that we all face. So with that background, I just wanted to talk about getting into politics after retiring from active practice, where my political aspirations might conflict with patients, and that would have been a detriment to our ability to interact and focus on their problems potentially, and as a distraction. So as I've retired, I've had the opportunity to become involved in political activities, and this has led me to become much more aware of wokeism in the culture, and its origins, and also its effects and its pervasiveness. Wokeism is a fascinating phenomenon. It seems to invoke, if you notice, a trance-like state for the people that are in it, and they seem to suspend critical thinking and introspection. And it apparently is associated with Marxist ideology, and appears to have its roots in the 60s. But it also shares a lot of features of the Middle Ages, and also the Inquisition, because it's a cult that encourages searching out heretics and blasphemers, and they have no tolerance for anything but a true believer. So, as I summarize it to start, before we get into more of the depth of it in a holistic fashion, the Marxist ideology was failing on an economic agenda to destroy America, because even with our imbalance of our maldistribution, if you will, of the luxuries and the riches of a free market society, even those that somehow came on the short end of the stick, if you will, their status and quality of life was still so much higher than the state for most of the world that that was a failing strategy to disrupt the United States free market constitutional system. So during the 60s, while there was significant racism in this country, and well-intentioned people joined in to fight racism and social justice, if you will, or I would prefer to say justice for all, equally. And their well-intentioned efforts became hijacked by a cultural Marxist ideology, which began to bring in other things. And as I've talked about in the past, these socialists knew that they had to disrupt the prevailing culture so that they could introduce their Marxist socialist utopian dreams. And the foundation of Western civilization is the family And of that family, the keystone, if you will, of the arch is mothers. And so since the 60s, we've had disparaging of mothers by feminists, and the husband has already been marginalized as a check from Uncle Sam. So you now have that type of activity combined with the mothers, and I forgot to mention, I'm sorry, the mothers have been disparaged since the 60s, and now that's encapsulated women in general. So you now mix that with the introduction of the CRT agenda, which teaches children at a very young age that they're either oppressed or oppressors or perpetrators or victims. And that makes children feel badly. They're told that they're either an oppressor or they need special treatment to succeed, and because they can't do it on their own, which is obviously a falsehood. So, but it does achieve the goal of making them feel poorly, and then pushing it back on, well, you do know that your position in this puzzle is dictated by your parents' skin color as you inherited it. In addition to that, they introduce sexualization of children and gender fluidity at a very young age. These are the same age children that believe in Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny. And they're very willing to take on the parents' or any adults' teachings. And this is combined with your sexual identity, if you feel confused at all, is linked to your parents' traditional family values, which means that you can no longer trust them, but you can trust the educator. And you can talk to us, which really brings on a separation of the children from their parents, which is an ugly thing and something that should be forcible, who should be protected against from our children. So those things are the background of the woke thought process. And the woke religion, if you will, or cult, I would call it, has its own creation myth. And it's based on the 1619 Project by, what was her name? Nicole Hannah-Jones. And it starts with the saying that the problems in America started in 1619 with the introduction of the first African slaves into this country. And then it goes on over time to say that in the Revolutionary War was fought in 1776 because America did not want to consider the abolition of slavery that was going to be introduced by Britain. And there is no evidence or indication of that. The Marxist cult produces an attitude of silencing all of those who disagree with its teachings. And by silencing, I mean they would first socially humiliate you, followed by destroying your career, and also introduce the threat of physical violence. And if you think about it, things like Antifa and BLM and woke mobs are the enforcing component of this cult. So, and this cult didn't give them a god, although I would probably interject that government and control is their altar. And with that, they have definitely introduced a Satan, and Satan is MAGA, or now ultra MAGA, I guess, and deplorables and whites. People, when they don't have a God anymore with the secularization that started in the 60s, they do look for something that will ground their thoughts and purpose. And so, as Freud said, and I'll read this one to you, if you expel religion as a system of doctrine, another system will take its place. And often with the rigidity, intolerance, and prohibition of free thought. So the Marxist-inspired movement is much more than that. And they have tenets such as equity instead of equality. They want to destroy the Western civilization foundation, as we talked about. They want to redefine words. They want to destroy objective science, rewrite history, and create what they call a Marxist utopia. And Marxism or wokeism sacrifices true diversity, which is diversity of thought, in exchange for a diversity of skin color and ethnicity. And the tools of this cult to bring you into obeyance, if you will, is calling you a racist in the public space, which is a very effective strategy. And to go a little further onto this parallelism, wokeism has an original sin also. Whereas they say Christians have the original sin, they say that, they use phrases like enduring white responsibility to deconstruct our privilege and the systemic pervasiveness of white supremacy, which is a very disturbing thought. But it's interesting, the woke accept this white privilege narrative as their original sin, as a stain that should be accepted and carried as a burden. You would expect people would get upset with that, but really they oftentimes approach it with acceptance, and then it energizes them and cleanses them by this degradation. They ritually atone for this and then seek to find the non-believers, which encompasses the whole spectrum of our society. And it's quite scary to my thinking. If you look at the different components, and I probably have 10 or 15 areas that this is exemplified in the modern era. We look at our education, and this cult has been very active in education, in addition to what I talked about with the CRT and the gender fluidity movement. History is being rewritten. White authors are being continually removed. Positions are now being created. These are the amazing things. Portland Public School System now has an Office of Equity. Exeter, the private school on the East Coast, has a director of diversity, which leads the diversity team and creates diversity conferences. We have equity leadership coaches now get $90,000 for an advertised position. And they're investing in training a faculty that in implicit bias, anti-racism, whiteness, privilege, and power, which is quite remarkable. Instagram now has sites where you can go on to make anonymous accusations of other individuals' racism, bigotry, and misconduct. The accounts are dedicated to naming and accusing other students, to shame them, to discredit them. And this one quote, I have to, they're trying to target freshmen. They're not trying to target freshmen and middle schoolers, they say, but people who are about to enter college and need to be held accountable for what they say. The administrator of the page was quoted as saying, "People who go to college and end up becoming racists, lawyers, and doctors, I don't want people like this to be getting jobs." So the wokeism, one of the quoters say that, they're eager to smoke out the heretics. And they start at an early age when people are still forming their adult persona and trying on different perspectives before they settle on their formed character. We see it in entertainment. I mean, Disney has become the latest entrance into this space, with its being pressured by its woke employees to, combat a narrative that they had put around the parental education or parental rights in education bill. And it has backfired to some degree, but it really has also brought out how pervasive this is with their agenda to, I hate to use phrases, but they want to remove the phrase ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and because that no longer represents our culture, and replace that with welcome friends. That, along with trying to introduce multiple transgender characters in a significantly higher level than they are represented in the culture. So these things are very concerning. They're obviously suffering some consequences from that, from the Florida state legislature and DeSantis, when he removes some of their special status recognitions, and their share prices reflecting the commonality of go woke, go broke, if you will. So they're feeling the effects of that. One quote that they had: the main purpose of entertainment is actually to beat you over the head with relentless woke messaging while constantly reminding you of the injustices that are happening all around you. You must never escape the real world, they say. So I don't know if Netflix is doing as well as it used to when it provided us with entertainment versus the menu that they now present to us, which is of that nature. Another area that to talk about corporations and the effect of wokeism that they enter into. ESG is the big message in corporate culture, with environmental concerns, social justice, and also governance diversity. The largest example of this is, as we've tried to increase stock ownership by the general population through simply understood platforms like what do you call them? EFTs, which would be exchange traded funds and index funds. This has allowed a lot easier entry for many people into the investing world, but it has had unintended consequences. We've transferred a huge amount of power to several very, very large entities like BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, which now command trillions of dollars of capital for all of us. And by that mechanism, have the power over boards throughout the country to introduce their agenda. And Larry Fink is the BlackRock CEO. Has embraced ESG in a major way, and by this mechanism has forced corporate boards to take green activists onto their board. And the interesting thing, the example is ExxonMobil, which has had to take 3 green activists onto their board in preparation for advancing them over time to a more sustainable, hence more profitable position in the future. And the dirty secret in that is that these entities can charge more for this ESG studying of corporations to grade them and select a corporate spectrum of companies to invest. Similar kind of like the in the days of the what did they call it, the gambling, tobacco, and alcohol agenda, or avoiding those, and introducing avoiding guns also. So those things are all introduced, and the dirty secret is that they make more money on these funds, and at the same time they're not held to the same performance standards as other competing funds, because they have the aura of social responsibility, if you will, that basically in the long run forces us to accept a lower performance level in return for the virtue signaling of these companies, and at the behest of these giant companies that command a significant component of their shares. And also, let's see, in
Excuse me,
addition,
Dave, can I interrupt and ask a question? That you said the ESG, what does that stand for?
environment, social, and governance. The ESG is the environmental concerns, social concerns, and government, basically diversity of their board structure, both in skin color and in attitude towards those first two items, I would say.
Thanks.
Oh yeah, you're welcome. You know, the other interest in corporate activity in the woke spectrum and in its advancement is, as we've seen with Coke and Walmart and Home Depot, all of these initiatives to be less white as a strategy, and they've introduced things like meaning be less oppressive, less arrogant, less defensive, and less ignorant. And the hallmarks of whiteness were described as scientific method, the written word, punctuality, hard work. We're all perpetuating white supremacy. This is what a lot of those companies had promulgated until those issues by some of their employees have been put up on the screen. Obviously, we've seen a big movement in this area in sports, as you can think about it, from their logos to their uniforms, through their, they've chosen to advance the idea that this country is not worth respecting, the flag should not be honored, the national anthem should be disrespected. But at the same time, it's interesting that you remember, I don't know if you remember when the Washington Wizards were the Baltimore Bullets, and this virtue signaling of changing their name has not exactly been effective with reducing the crime and tragedy in those cities. Baltimore has become a major epicenter of criminality and gun violence. So it hasn't really done the thing that they wished it to do. An interesting sidelight is obviously Brittany Griner right now is trapped in Russia, and she was a hallmark person for disrespecting the country and its laws and its constitution. And now that she's in a Russian prison, she is very interested in activating those features that would rescue her from that totalitarian or corrupt state. And I think she would find our laws and thoughts and law enforcement much more valuable going forward. So there are interesting dichotomies in these things. They've also, we look at the GM of one of the pro basketball teams was basically drummed out of the core, if you will, because he sided with Hong Kong's residents when they were being persecuted by the nationalist or the communist Chinese. So these things are all interesting that they cross over, and people don't see the hypocrisy and the conflict because they are told, as I've talked about at other times, that I think there's a push to see how far they can get them. When they say men can be women, men that declare themselves as women should be put in women's prison, what could possibly go wrong? That Trump's tax cuts only favored the rich when all the data shows that it has been well distributed throughout the population with regard to the tax benefits that were pushed through and the resulting, elevation of tax revenue. So those things have all have been pushed, along with, as we've talked about in other venues, pedophilia has now been trying to normalize and destigmatize that we are being encouraged to call them minor attracted persons and look at them in a different light as a variant of normalcy. We even now have a transgender pedophilic professor of diversity at Johns Hopkins University. And that you can take away from as you will. In addition to the latest American Library Association self-proclaimed Marxist lesbian, as she describes herself, with her teaching the queering of the catalog as one of her agendas. So this this activity is pervasive and it's widespread, as in its attempts to change the culture. And if we look at the workplace, the workforce conformity has its root desire to, smoke out heretics. You remember the Microsoft employee that when he made the statement that it would be almost impossible to diversify by gender the programming ranks, because only, I forgot the exact percentage, but it was maybe 10% of all programmers are female for whatever reason. But self-selection in a lot of ways is desiring which career. But there's no way that diversity can get to the 50-50 split that the gender categorizations would dictate. So those things, again, are problems, and they push us to think in ways that don't make any sense to those of us who have been around a significant period of time and have watched the culture evolve. Other things that have become, I wanted to, there are so many levels of, let me just refer to my notes as far as, we have in technology, we have the keepers of the flame, if you will. We have the fact checkers and big tech censorship, preventing the discussion of items and topics that don't align with the ideology. So these things, and also, the public discourse, the changing of names, a big one, or not a big one, but an idea of that from Mazie Hirono, who, when interviewing Amy Coney Barrett for Supreme Court Justice, when she used the term sexual preference, this quickly was redefined after the fact in Webster's dictionary as a culturally offensive term, which was never something that I don't think the three of us would have considered it. Well, actually a respectful way to describe a diversity of attraction. But these types of things that can turn and root you out, if you will, are becoming more and more pervasive every day. And the difficulty in bridging that change has become more and more difficult. So other areas, in other areas of entertainment, just again, that the diversity in trying to define Academy Awards, the canceling of those who don't fit that that narrative are occurring on a regular basis. And those, if we talk about the media, it's another area which is of a major concern, which the media, they walk in lockstep, they speak the same message, and there is a total intolerance for anything that goes against the woke agenda. So you get discussions held that the largest threat or the greatest threat to the country is white nationalists, and you get parents being described as domestic terrorists, and the direction of the FBI and the DOJ towards those groups is quite disturbing, and has caused some of the backlash that we're seeing throughout the culture with the elections in Virginia and other places because of that extremism. Now, just to be a decent person pretty much gets you in the right extremist camp. So there's been some major changes with this woke religion that I call it a religion, a cult, whatever you like, but it has become a way for certain folks to gather around a narrative and look to punish non-believers, and that has become something that we're all concerned about as a point of friction within the cultural mix. Those are some of the major thoughts I had on wokeism, and I'm curious if there's questions of you two, and I know we don't have a big audience tonight, but I'd love to explore whatever thoughts you have and talk in more depth about it.
Well, I think, thank you very much.
Thank you very much
for your summation,
for your
Doctor.
summation, Doctor. That was
College level,
college
master's degree level. And I took a college course called The Sociology of Cults and Sects, SECTS, when I was doing my undergraduate. And it was one of the most fascinating courses that I had. And this really does examine the whole issue from that perspective, from a collegiate academic perspective. And you did a couple of things that really surprised me. How you said that they have their own original sin, they have their own altar, who their God is. They have a Satan. The correlations to religion here are astounding, and I never really put it in that perspective before. But I saw it as a cult, and I think you heard our guest Megan Wildhood, who was actually a part of this cult and has been deprogrammed willingly. So it's quite fascinating. But the thing that I want to throw out here, and because you've done the work on this, I think most of these major cults have a figurehead. And I'm curious as to how you would look, or behind the scenes. I know who's behind the curtain on a lot of this with the Marxist ideology, et cetera, but I look at other cults like Branch Davidians with David Koresh, their charismatic leader. You had the Jim Jones, where, absolutely horrific things that came out of that. The Bhagwan Shi Rajneesh, there's usually a charismatic figurehead that carries us forth. And yet it seems like we have one in all of these different areas. Who's that figurehead in education? We know we've got General Milley, in the military. You didn't mention the military as one of those institutions, but that's yet another. The positions that are created in technology, et cetera. So what's your feeling on kind of that? Is there a major figurehead, or do each one of these different arenas have their own? And who are they answering to?
Well, that's a good question. And I think there's more than one. I think it's a movement more than a figurehead, but your point is well taken that most cults will have a spiritual leader, if you will. This one has a trinity of ideological texts that are usually referred to as guiding principles. And they usually, the fourth I would put would be the 1619 project for the origins. But then you have Coates's The World Against Me. You have Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility. And you have an Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. Because they're like the Catholic Church has as we are all sinners. This movement has we are all racists. And to deny racism is to confirm your racist nature. As with the slogan, silence is violence. So those that I don't have a specific person that I would identify that I've come across. There have been many, I would say, pretenders to the throne with different literature, and just like you would see apostles, you have these different figures that in different arenas are championing the cause and rooting out the heretics and demanding total compliance with the vocabulary and the doctrine that they bring forth.
Well, the other thing I want to bring out quickly, and I'll have Jim weigh in on this end as well, is there is, for all of the inability for them to identify their own hypocrisy in all this and see where the end result is going historically, which is a science-based, logical-based argument. I do believe that there is now pushback. I believe that there's a groundswell of pushback because we have been awakened as well. We've gotten awakened, not woke. And I do believe that in our political climate, our school boards, our library boards, or any area that we have inroads to, including in corporate America, I think we have an obligation to start pushing back wherever we can push back, wherever our voices can be heard in this. And the ESG, the environmental, social, and governmental diversity, you can go to almost any major website, any corporate website, and you scroll down to the bottom, and they all have their diversity, inclusion, and equity policies, just about every single one of them. And it's one of those things that we need to start pushing back at every level. And I don't really know how to start pushing back at that level because it is so entrenched. But if you could speak to that just a little bit, the library board, how can you educate people and kind of expose the hypocrisy? Are there strategies that we can start employing? Have you seen anything working? Because I think we could start, if we can tap into that, we can start our own counter movement.
Right. And I think, we did the one positive that I think that came out of the pandemic is that people had the opportunity to just slow down, look around, think a little bit, and realize what was being fed to their children. And most places it was fine, but there was a significant effect that was occurring in some areas and some communities that was toxic to the family. And that woke up the mama bear, as Jim and I spoke about yesterday. And as I'd said from youth coaching, you can do whatever you want to the parents, but you harm their children, they'll remember you forever. And so I think that movement is the driving force that will be tapped into as we move to try to just balance the playing field. And this isn't this is multiracial, multi-ethnic mothers and fathers that all care about this. This isn't any one person or group. This is across the board. And as we've seen it in the polling, both Democrats and Republicans are both concerned that these issues be addressed in a fashion that allows the parents to be involved and the traditional family values, whatever they are, to be honored in the family. So I think that, yes, as far as in certain areas, I think people, I've been amazed at how people cannot see the imbalances and the actuality. I've had discussions on the campaign trail about extremism, meaning that wanting to have a balanced perspective and a balanced portfolio, balanced collection, or just have that removed because it's not really a component of what we send our children to school for. They don't need that type of training. If they do, we will seek it out as parents, but we don't need it basically spoon-fed to the children.
Dave, I appreciate your dialogue tonight and the research you put into hosting this call on wokeism. I'll tell you a funny story. I took the family to the movies this last weekend to see a movie called Family Camp. And Samantha did the research. There was no research. She just picked a kids movie and we wanted to take the kids to the movie. But what was interesting is that society has flipped 180 degrees. And I found myself watching this movie going, do they realize that they're speaking about God and that, this is such a clean movie? I was feeling like people are going to walk out of the movie theater because it was so clean. I had no idea that it's a faith-based movie showing at a secular movie theater here in town. But the whole time I kept looking over my shoulder, like, are people walking out because this is too clean for them? The message is too good and they're talking about God and they're singing. So to me, it's amazing how far we've gone to the other side, where I was feeling guilty for a clean movie being in the public theater, right? And so my question for you, Dave, and maybe it's more or less allowing you to give a statement, is you've been attacked hard in your position on the library board for the work that you're trying to do over there to protect our children from this pornographic type material in our libraries. If you could give one simple message to some of those attackers or some of those parents that are too naive to know the difference, what would be that simple message? Because we've got to start somewhere. And the things that you've discussed tonight are so entirely complex for the normal citizen to digest the fact that there's a bigger thing at work here. What would be your simple message to these families or these people?
Well, what I've tried to impart is this issue has nothing to do with genders or sexuality. It had to do with obscenity, and just the descriptions as presented in several Montana Code sections and also local ordinances. Yes, there's a workaround for libraries and museums, but I think they have the ability, and to try to simplify it. I'm trying, Jim. I know I'm trying to make sure that I dot my T's and cross my I's, or vice versa. Yeah, all I'm looking for is mechanisms to give parents tools to influence and affect what their children are exposed to for as long as possible. And however we can arrive at that, without it being called censorship or book banning or book burning. That's not the point. First Amendment is sacrosanct, but minors are a separate category, and they should be acknowledged that way, and tools available for parents to be involved in raising their children as much as possible. And that's the goal that I wish to achieve. I don't know if that answers your question, but those are the ideas that I wish to promulgate. And whether it's, that there seems to be roadblocks and no assistance in trying to find common ground in that regard.
David does answer the question. I just feel like we're trying to bridge the gap between conspiracy theory in most people's minds, the reality that we both know, and Rod as well, in our elected positions, that we can see that bridge, right? And I think that everyday person that has concerns, they still look at this as, well, that's a little conspiracy theory to me, that there's this big agenda behind these movements, right? So yeah, you answered the questions, but this is going to be a much larger problem for us to solve as conservative Christians as time goes on. And I think that the work that we're individually doing, and of course, anybody running for an elected office needs to understand that when they get on the other side of the table, they're going to see these things and they're alive and well. And if you're not on the other side of the table yet, it's worth fighting for. It's worth trying to get elected and putting the time and energies in to be elected, to actually see what's happening, right? So I'll just close my statements. I want to thank you for the work you're doing, not only on the library board, but your push.
I wanted to ask you one question, Jim, that folds in with this, if we have a moment. It's interesting that in the school board where you're involved, the push is that parents have enough involvement, let the teachers do their job, and then when school gets out, then the parents are responsible for everything in the library arena, but the professional librarians are a separate group that shouldn't be be influenced at all also. So I just found it because I consider the library an after school program to some degree, because that's where they get the rest of their education. Sorry to interrupt you, but I just wanted to point that kind of interesting correlation or, friction between what they say the parents are totally involved at the library about what you see, but at school, we know what they need to see. So it's kind of interesting that way.
Yeah, and it's a really good point. And by the way, in your adult years, when you don't have kids in the house anymore, we kind of lose sight of the library, to be honest with you, and especially with technology for what it is. But now that I've got kids in school, 6 and 8 years old, the library has become a really big, important part of their lives. And I think what that does is it really kind of showcases the importance of the materials that are in our libraries, not only at our schools. And as some people know that will hear this call, Billings School District has accepted the books that you're trying to ban from the library, or get removed for the protection of our kids. And I realize now as a parent how important it is that we have an understanding of what our kids are exposed to, not only in the school libraries, but the public libraries. So that goes back to my gratitude to you. Now that I'm back in the fray of realizing how important libraries can be, but for 30 years when I didn't have any kids and I was an adult, I didn't care about the library, but we all need the library.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Yes, good point.
Well, I'm going to bring this to a close. I'm going to wrap this up. And again, Dr. Ingram, I appreciate the work that you put into this because, like I said, this was like a college crash course. I mean, it was high caliber, well thought out, well done, and well explained. And I've got 2 pages of notes, and I'm a note taker anyway, but I appreciate that. Because the mission of 1776 is to, encourage and empower, regular people to get involved in politics and then help them win elections. I would be remiss if I didn't use this opportunity to say that every one of us has a responsibility. If we're living in this country, we have a duty and a responsibility to take this challenge on wherever we happen to be, whether it's corporate America right now, whether it's at a board appointment somewhere. I'm on the city county health board, so I'm out of one fray and into another, but
Exactly.
It's those same kind of issues, school boards, city councils, whether it's the sheriff. I mean, we have to hold one another accountable. And whoever is serving on these boards, we need to give them support. We need to give them encouragement. We need to be involved in their decision making. We have to stand up, step up, get involved, stay involved, educate ourselves. And more importantly, we need to network with one another. Just like tonight, right now, this is a small band, but this band reaches out to almost 100 people. We collectively can do an awful lot more than we can individually. We've got a 3-chord band, but we've got a 100-chord band. We can have a 1,000-chord band. We need to amplify our voice at this point in time. And that means we need to stand firm, stand strong, and continue to press on where we're planted, and keep pressing on for that higher mark. What's that next office? What's that next position? Do I do this again? Do I run again? Jim and I had this conversation just today. Yes, you run again. And if you spent that time on the board, you run again. We need this voice, this solidity, and we need to be consistent with that as well. So I really appreciate everything that you've put into this. I appreciate your service to our community, your service to our country in this regard. This goes far beyond the reaches of, a local community. This is in every community in America and across the globe. So right. Thank you for that. Any final closing words, Jim?
No, I just want to thank Dave for his effort. And if you're listening to the show later, Dave did an incredible podcast with me yesterday on the Liberty or Lose podcast site. You can find it at my website, Live Life Driven, and just check it out. I mean, Dave, I learned so much about you yesterday, and you were very articulate in your positioning, what's important. So thank you for that as well.
Thank you.
Right.
I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
I will check that out as well. Next week, we have on the slate former managing editor of the Kalispell Daily Interlake. who is now probably best known for his Heartland Diary series and Real Clear Politics page. So Frank is going to be on with us next week, and the following week we will have Professor Rob Nadelson, probably the premier constitutional scholar in the country, been cited by the Supreme Court on multiple occasions, and he will be our speaker 2 weeks from now. So got a great lineup. Just like tonight, we can tap into all the resources available to us, and I appreciate everybody's time. With that, we're going to end the call. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye now.